Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Michelle Graff, and I'm the editor-in-chief at National Jeweler. I'm pleased to welcome you to the latest episode of My Next Question, National Jeweler's webinar series sponsored by RDI Diamonds. Today's session is hosted by our senior editor, Ashley Davis, who will be sitting down with Simon Mortimer, founder of ABD Associates by Design, to discuss branding for your business. Before I turn the discussion over to Ashley and Simon, I just want to let our attendees know that if they have a question, they can type it into the Zoom Q&A box. I'll be back on at the end of the discussion to facilitate the Q&A. Also, today's session is being recorded and will be available on the National Jeweler website this coming Friday, June 18th. Now I'll turn it over to Ashley to get things started. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome, Simon. I'm so excited to have you here today. How are you?
I'm very good, Ashley. Thank you for the invite for National Jeweler, and I'm really excited to start talking about brand because I think everyone has such a different perception of what brand is, and even my perception might be different to yours. So it's going to be an interesting conversation.
I really wanted to have you on our webinar series after I got to interview you for one of our print articles that we did a couple of years ago now, because I learned so much about branding. And so I kind of, again, just wanted to really break branding down to 101, because I think that the basics are important even for a brand that thinks that they have their identity totally set. I think it's really important for brands to kind of revisit that. So to start, I was wondering if you could tell us, how do we define branding? Brand is a word that's used in so many different contexts, but what exactly is a brand, and what is kind of the most basic understanding of that term?
Okay, so the way I put it in a couple of different ways. I think brand, for externally, is a promise from an organization or a business to their customer. So that promise that they must hold over, however many years they're interacting with that customer. And I also think from a consumer point of view, brand is a collection of experiences, whether that's through social and content, whether that's going into the store, whether that's receiving an email from someone at let's say a jewelry brand, whether that's a product, every touch point a brand offers through digital content that they create, an email, they're all brand touch points. And I think that collective experience is what represents the brand to a consumer. And I think brands kind of have this responsibility to inspire us, to do better, to live by certain values that we all, associate and align with. Okay. I hope that helps answer. I mean, I could go on. I think a lot of people think a brand is a logo and a color palette. And the way we would break brand down is this, like I said, a collection of experience. And then when we talk about brand identity, that's broken down into visual identity and verbal identity. So it's those two elements that communicate in that brand ethos, and they have to be working simultaneously together to deliver that really cohesive experience.
So there are really so many different elements, like you said, and it kind of encompasses all of these different touch points.
Exactly.
In the way that a company would interact.
Exactly. So I think you can make simple changes every day to your brand. If you have a core story that you are trying to articulate to a consumer, I would start to think about how does that story manifest on my digital e-commerce? How does that same story manifest in social? The lexicon and the language we use and the vocabulary, is that consistent across our captions in social media? Is it consistent, our tonality consistent in our emails to our clients internally and externally? Is the language, similar on our digital platforms? So we're trying to create this really sort of holistic view of that brand world. That's how I like to think of it, as a brand world. If I can pull a social post and I can pull the logo and I can do a screen grab of the website, does it feel holistic? Does it feel like it's all, you know, articulating the same story? And I think that's a good sort of way of checking yourself.
Yeah, I love the word holistic. I think that really fits with what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think I think you have to think a little bit bigger than you have to have an ethos, and you have to like maintain that all the way through your communication pieces. And I think what's really powerful is about arming your consumer with your story and your ethos, so that they can become they almost become your advocates and your number one fans. And they're a free marketing material. You know, it doesn't cost, if you can reach them and arm them with a story, it doesn't cost you anything for them to start replicating that story and talking to other people about it. And they become, and we know that, you know, word of mouth is the best form of communication than anything else, because it comes with a level of trust and honesty. And I think they become your biggest advocates.
Absolutely. So considering that one brand could have started very organically, they kind of started selling a product and things just came together, and before they knew it, they had a company without maybe ever having really consciously thought about all of these different aspects of the brand. And then another company conversely could kind of start right away with the perfect social media and the very specific vision. Whichever approach that a company takes, where do you even begin to start the branding process? Like, what is step number one?
Okay, so I think, yeah, to make it as simple as possible, without saying that everyone, you know, everyone's at a different place in their sort of journey. But I think two things that we always think about is, who are you and where are you going, and how do we help you, and how do we get there? I was actually reading an article a little while ago about the future, and it said, you know, for brands, if you want to be different, think 5 years ahead and then work your way back, rather than going from point 1, point 2, point 3, etc. So try and think ahead and work your way back. But like I said, brands are in so many different phases. So I think honing your story, look, everyone has a story. I mean, the brand that you've started is made up of your collective experiences, the culture that's around you. So you have a story, and it's really about uncovering that and then finding a really honest, tangible way to communicate that out to the external world. And that story is always going to be unique to you. So I think that's the most important thing, is about uncovering what that story is. And we work with brands all the time that are starting from scratch. They've been around we actually work with Mountain Valley, who've been around for 150 years. And we had to help them define their story. They have a story, but it's about getting all of that information out onto the table and start trying to articulate the right message and story that sort of reflects that brand and their sort of heritage. I mean, that's, you know, it's one thing that no one can take away from you, is your story. So I think just be truthful to that, and don't try and follow someone else's story, because you'll get found out.
Authenticity is key.
It is, and I hate that word, to be honest, because you know, everyone uses it, but it is right. Authenticity is key, and I think that is it. It's strange because I think consumers are so savvy, they can kind of feel when a brand is being authentic versus kind of skirting around the edges of who they really are. I think it's just this sense that you get that it's maybe the brand's not being truthful to who they are, and they don't, you know, the shoes don't fit maybe.
So you mentioned briefly about a brand's ethos.
Mhm.
And then this is something we had discussed for the article that I got to
Yep.
interview you for. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about what a brand's ethos is, which I think is like part of its story, but maybe an even more succinct aspect of its brand story. And can you kind of give an example?
So your ethos, I would say, is what is your mission? Like, what did you set out to do? What value are you delivering? What value are you delivering to your consumer? And how are you improving their life? And what's your vision as a company? Those are two like really crucial things that we try to figure out. And I think vision is like, we're thinking long term about the brand we want to be, and like I said, 5 years ahead, and where are you going? And the mission is more about why did we even set out? You know, what is the purpose we started with? And is that still true? Has it changed? It's not a problem if it's changed, but we need to make sure that all the sort of everything's pointing in the same direction. I think in terms of one that I can give a good example to, I think I'll just say Nike, because everyone can relate to it. And I think what they do really well is you walk into the store, whoever you are, whatever shape, ethnicity, size, ability, you walk into that store, and that store is almost like you're walking into the arena. And they just released a new campaign that was all about, you know, you didn't need to be good at sport to be part of Nike. And Nike's ethos and their sort of brand personality is all about being the coach. I think that sort of coach on the sideline that's encouraging you to do better or aspire, or, you know, keeping you aspirational. And I think you really feel that through their advertising, through the store. It's super inclusive. And that's one other thing I probably want to touch on is brand personality, because I think this is a really simple attribute to try and figure out. And once you figure that out, it becomes really clear how you need to start communicating to your audience. So if you're like, think about how your brand walks, how your brand sounds. Is it confident? Is it bold? Is it sort of elegant and light on its feet? And is there a dance to it? Because I think all of those attributes start to make you think about, okay, so if we're sort of move with grace and elegance, then what does our verbal language, what does that actually sound like? And you can start to actually put those parameters to your brand. Because I think, I'm just trying to think of it, you know, Nike is very like, go out and get it, seize the day, seize the moment, and it has a kind of language attached to it. You wouldn't kind of have this elegant sort of slow moving romanticized language attached to Nike. It just doesn't match. But if you can start thinking about what your personality as a brand is, you can start to think about, how am I going to write my copy for my website? How am I going to write these captions on my social media? And it kind of helps to solidify some of those thinking. And that's an exercise, you know, we do that exercise with our clients all the time. And that's definitely something, you know, if you don't have budget to engage an agency, that's definitely something you can sort of play around with yourself and start to think about what feels right to the brand, and try a few things internally with people that you know and people that know the brand well, and say, does this tonality feel like us? And sort of work your way up from there.
Right, just always keeping the cohesive element in mind.
Absolutely.
As you kind of flesh that out and imagine that.
Exactly. Absolutely, that's spot on. Yeah, I think once you sort of kind of define your personality, that opens a lot of doors. to where you should start going. And I think understanding the personality also helps you start to know visually how to represent yourself as well.
So just kind of imagining myself as a founder of a brand, I'm curious with defining your audience, how do you avoid, I guess, going too narrow? Because if you have this vision, you're developing this vision, and you want to, of course, be as widely appealing as possible for your sales. How do you kind of figure out who to appeal to,
right,
and how to not go too narrow or too wide in who you're appealing to, because it's not going to be for everybody, this kind of tone that you're establishing in your company?
So that's such a difficult question, and I'm going to try and give my best answer. And I've thought about this a lot, and I think because, you know, jewelry designers are artists, so we think about that. An artist isn't designing for any person. It's an expression of their culture and their experiences. So to then say, I need to try and target this to an audience just seems a little disingenuous to the artist. But I know at the same time, jewelry designers are also running a business, so let's call them commercial artists or something like that. There's so much data out there at the moment, you know, with Instagram, Google Analytics, that we can actually start to look at least demographics. And I think once you have a demographic kind of nailed down, it does become much easier to start targeting towards, you know, like age ranges, you know, male, female, genders. You can look at, you know, the performance of certain posts on social and stuff like that. But, you know, we say this to our clients all the time. You can't be everything to everyone. Because then you just end up being nothing to anyone. And I also know that if you have those, you know, 1,000 diehard followers, they're going to be huge advocates for the brand. But it's very difficult to find exactly who they are. And I think one thing I think Instagram could be really good at, and I don't want to get into social too much, obviously, at this stage, as we're talking sort of high level brand, is that Instagram allows you to take those polls. And I think you need to work a little bit harder to find out about who your audience is, what they like, and start to build a psychographic of who that person is. So the way we do it when we do these exercises, we try and take as much information from the client as possible on the audience. We define all of that and distill it into a singular person. So it could be Ashley, she's age X between this and this. What's her personality type? What does she do on the weekends? So we can actually get into the shoes of that person, and then it makes it a lot easier to then start targeting our content or our brand messaging around that person. But in terms of defining an audience, I think it's really difficult. I think you need to look into a lot of your data that you can. If you have Google Analytics, you can look at where they're coming from. You can see if they're male or female, age ranges, and the same, you know, maybe it's worth just putting a few polls out into social and seeing what feedback you get there, and seeing what people are responding to, who's commenting on your post the most. I think, you know, there's some data there that's just in your hand already that you can start using. I hope that answers it. I think. Oh, but we spoke earlier. I think that's one of the.
To an extent, maybe don't be so calculating as to I'm going to appeal exactly to this person, but just once you're starting and doing all of these branding exercises and kind of executing your plan, pay attention to your analytics.
Exactly.
Pay attention to what's performing well. Look at the demographics, because it could be really interesting. You know, you could have more male followers than you thought. And
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think I think that's totally right. You can do a Survey Monkey and send it out to everyone on your mailing list, and give them a discount for filling it out. I don't know, encourage them to spend as well at the same time.
Yeah.
But I think there's, you have a certain amount, you have an audience already. You're not, you're probably not a brand that's just coming into the world with no audience and trying to figure it out straight off the bat. That doesn't really happen. It kind of grows organically, and it's more about how do you find out who these people are and what they're interested in. And I think using the information that you have at hand as a jumping off point is probably the best way. And there's also, you can do, we call it A/B testing. So write a message in one sort of tonality and put it with an image and post that, and maybe put some ad spend behind it, and do another one with the same image and a different message, and see which one performs better. And then you can start, and again, you can start to work out these, you can start to work this out. It's almost like it's a bit reductive. You put a lot out there and start to reduce what's not working. Hopefully you end up with something a little bit more solid. So you just have to get in the weeds and get creative. You're like, how do I find out who these people are?
So many different full-time jobs, it feels like,
I know.
involved with having a company, but hopefully you can grow to the point where you can delegate a little bit.
That's the idea.
So we haven't touched much yet on visual identity. I'm curious, what do you think are the core visual elements to keep in mind?
Okay, so everyone's going to say, oh, it's all about a logo. We kind of like, oh, what does my logo look like though? And we kind of get stuck in the weeds on what your logo ends up looking at, because you feel like it's got to be plastered everywhere. But I think if you think about brands like Tiffany, keeping it in the jewelry space, you think about teal, the color teal. So there are lots of defining factors around how people respond and associate with your brand, beyond a logo. So I think, again, when we do this, the actual logo is probably one of the last things we show. We start showing, what the idea is, how we're trying to bring the brand ethos to life. So we come up with a creative idea, and then we start to show through, whether it's color, illustration, a graphic language, or visual typography, start to show how that comes to life. Because what we want to create something that's unique to the brand, but also has something that you need something that's recognizable beyond a logo. And I say that because let's say you're doing a billboard. You're not going to blast your logo huge across a billboard. You're going to have, let's say in the jewelry, you're going to have a piece of jewelry on a massive photo, and you're going to have the tiny little logo. So we need to think of something that can establish that recognizability for a brand beyond just a logo. And that could be typography choice, that could be, and the way you use typography, that could be a color palette like Tiffany's, which has done so well, and so many, Hermes, for instance. Like, you don't need to see any logo, you just know that their brand's orange and they have a horse and cart or horse and carriage rather. So I would try and think a little bit outside of the box, and when we look at visual identity, we're looking at the art direction of the photography. What does the body language and the posture of the talent, the models say about the brand? How is it lit? we look at typography, we're looking at color palette, we're looking at, you know, any graphic elements that might help elevate the brand or articulate the ethos. So there are lots of things, and some brands use some, you know, some brands are more color driven, some brands have more graphic language and patterns, and it all depends through that explorative sort of experience, what we feel right, what we feel fits in to that story.
Right. And it's funny because when I think of a brand logo, I'll think of Nike, like you mentioned, and certain ones, but I can't even think of that many brand logos for maybe the smaller brands that are actually my favorites. It's more of like a feeling that I might recognize it from all of these different elements that you're talking about, like a certain attitude that they portray.
That's that collective experience of walking into the store, having a smell, someone greets you in a certain way, the product feels a certain way, and you come out with that collective experience. You know, and I have people like, they want to use a monogram or something like that, and it's we really have to like establish a name first and foremost. And a monogram is like a symbol, for instance. And the idea is that eventually you can get to the point where you can use a symbol and it becomes synonymous with the brand, and you can ditch everything else and just use this symbol. Like Starbucks, for instance, when they ditched the Starbucks and just had the mermaid. You know, even like Nike and Apple, when they first started out, they had a name. You know, they didn't just jump straight from Nike. They weren't just straight the swoosh, the swoosh. I have to use my Americanisms. But Nike. So yeah, I mean, there's this, you know, an evolution, like MasterCard, for instance. How that brand has evolved over time is really interesting. It's just at this point in time, everything seems to have become super simplified.
Yeah. We hear so much today about brand values and communicating your brand values. I'm curious, from a branding perspective, what do you think is the way to communicate these values, and how does that tie into the brand ethos and the branding, just the overall holistic image of the brand?
Yeah, I think you know, when we think about the values, that I think that comes more across in the language we use and how we kind of, through language and imagery, articulate our values. I don't think it necessarily needs to like be conveyed in an identity, like a logo type or anything like that. But your values must be inherent to you as a brand. I don't think we're going out just randomly going, oh, I like to, let's say, responsibly sourced is a value. Let's say that, for example. Then I would start thinking about, yeah, it's a great value to have, but it doesn't do any justice just living in a brand deck somewhere and not being articulated to the consumer. And I would start to think about, okay, if that is one of our values, how do we start to have that conversation with our audience through our, you know, website, through our social media, and what image and language do we put to that? And not only that, how do we prove that we are sort of standing behind that value as well? So if we are about sustainably resourced materials, what are we doing? Are we, you know, certified? Are we using sustainable materials? And then what does that, you know, how do we portray that in our advertising or our marketing? And when I say marketing, I mean social media is marketing at this point. So yeah, I think, you know, you've already got your story. I think you know, your values are inherent. It's not going to be difficult to find them. You just need to I think they're already there because you sort of go about your daily business. We all have them.
Yeah.
It's just we have to pick 3, I would say.
Okay.
Three is the magic number.
No, that's a helpful.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting to me, particularly in the jewelry space, is there might be a company that's been operating a certain way for a very long time, and they don't think to say a certain way that they do things. Like maybe their production is all domestic, and it's all made in New York City, and maybe they don't think to really talk about it. And then I'll see another brand who is like, maybe just a single designer who's working and making custom pieces and engagement rings for people. And they will just so clearly have it like in their Instagram bio, right at the top of their page, just no waste, everything, made to order, one of a kind, all made right here in New York City. And they just have such a clear way of communicating it at the forefront. And maybe a lot of different people are doing that and just not putting the message out. So I think, like you said, like language is the key to just communicating those values, but making it easy to find that, not in the About Us page on your website.
Exactly.
But maybe
not
having
stuck
it
at the back. Exactly. And I think Instagram's, we all love and hate Instagram. Well, I certainly do anyway. But I think Instagram does make it so easy, in a sense, to give you that platform to actually talk about that. And whether it's one of your highlights at the top that talks, maybe your 3 brand values live in your highlights at the top, and you use stories to talk about your values. But I think that makes it really easy. And I think what a lot of brands, you made a good point there about, using the Instagram bio. So many brands just say, especially in the jewelry space, find jewelry from New York City. How many brands can say that? So many brands can say that same thing. Like, that doesn't say anything about your story. That doesn't say anything unique about your perspective on jewelry and what you're trying to create. And then one other thing that, we talk about with brands when we've got those values and we want to communicate them over social or something like that, and say, okay, so we've got 3 values. Let's say they are 3 content streams for social media. How do we talk about sustainability? Here's some ideas. Here's how we write about it. Here's the kind of imagery we might use. How do we talk about, I don't know, another value, like, let's say honesty. How do we communicate honesty through our brand, through social? And then another value. And then sales, obviously. Let's say sales is like a 4th bucket of content. And I think when you're building out your social media calendar, you can think about, okay, I've got, building out the calendar for the month. I've got 30 days. I post every other day. So I've got 15 posts. 10% of my posts are going to be about sustainability and, sourcing materials. 30% of the calendar for that month is going to be about sales. 20% is going to be this, and the rest of the percentage is going to be that. So you can actually start to think about the cadence of your posting and making sure that you are beginning to talk about all of those values in the content that you're putting out, rather than, I know so many people, and we're all like hustling and trying to think, I need to post something, I'll just post something. This image looks great, let's just post it. And I'll do a small caption that says, and you diamond earring studs, and it's like, well, you're not really saying anything, and that could be someone's first interaction with your brand, and you probably just go straight past it because it doesn't really say anything. So I always think, whatever you're putting out there in terms of content needs to be purposeful, and it needs to articulate every little square you put out is an advertisement. So just be a little bit mindful on that message.
Yeah, and like you said, just think that that could be someone's first very first post that they're seeing from you.
Exactly.
So,
and you know, you have, I'm trying to remember the statistic, but I think for someone to engage, they have to see the piece of content 7 times. I think it's something like that. It's a lot. So when you are thinking about, oh, I've got a new collection coming out, or I've got to, you know, I don't know, it's a holiday season or something, think about every touch point, like on the website, get the emails ready, get the social content ready, get your press and PR ready, get it all lined up. So as soon as, you know, digital ads, as soon as you go out the gate, everything's there. And then that person is just constantly, maybe subconsciously, seeing that image of your brand and sort of tying it all together, essentially. So it becomes sort of inherent in the back of their mind.
right. I'm always surprised by how much an account will promote something new. But it's so smart because 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, I mean, you're just not going to catch your whole audience. It has to be consistent enough. So even if it is a brand value that you're talking about, I love how you said, oh, maybe I make sure that I'm delegating 10% of my kind of social media space each month to make sure that that's always kind of a thread of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also think, you know, I think there's this tendency for us to think that I need to put it on Instagram. And this takes me back to when we talk about audience. Be mindful of where your audience is spending time, because let's say you're a brand and your key audiences are like 50 to 60 plus, maybe, like older generation buy jewelry. They're not on Instagram, right? So maybe spend some more time they might be on Facebook, or they might read a certain publication. So try and figure out where those people are spending their time, because that means, you know, for you can put your efforts somewhere else, and Instagram, just using that as an example, might not give you the results you're hoping for. I'm not saying don't use Instagram, I think you have to, but I'm just saying when it comes to that point and you're actually doing a big push, really be mindful of where those people are. And, you know, we've only got so much budget. If we're putting some ad spend behind it, we want to make it as, you know, as effective as possible.
Are there certain touch points that you feel are sometimes overlooked, or any particular favorites, or ones that you find yourself with your clients kind of across the board always being like, don't forget about those email newsletters or whatever it is?
Funny how many people forget about how powerful those email newsletters can be.
Those really get me.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a sucker for, I only read Well magazine, that's the only newsletter I read. But I mean, to be mindful, don't be bombarding people with content consistently, but you know, if you're going to put some content out there, make sure it's got some value to it and someone's going to click through. It's interesting because I think, you know, the new generation is always the generation that's going to have the most spending power. That happens time and time again. It was millennials, it will soon probably be Gen Z if it isn't already. And you think about Gen Z are on TikTok, and brands probably aren't even thinking about TikTok at this point in the game. They're, you know, they've just got used to Instagram, if they have even got used to it. And to think about, oh God, there's another platform that I might have to start thinking about. But you have to think that, don't just think about your audience that you have today. Think about your audience that will be there tomorrow. And I think, you know, and that goes for something, I've had experiences where I've walked into expensive stores and I might have been coming from the gym and been in athleisure and had a bad service, and I'm like, I'm never shopping at this store again. And even if it's an aspirational store, the person might not be able to afford the product now, but 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the line, they could be. And if you leave a sour taste in their mouth, there's no way they're going to come back. So don't, you can be exclusive in a way, in terms of aspirations, being aspirational, but definitely don't be exclusive in the sense that you're leaving people out. We're trying to, you know, through brand, we really want to try and create a community. And I think that's really good about Instagram, is that, and Facebook. I don't like Facebook, but it's but it gives us that time and that opportunity to have conversation and open dialogue with you know, between brands and consumers. And, you know, if you, let's say Kim Kardashian, you comment on her post and she actually responds to you, what feeling that would give you to feel like you've been picked out of the crowd and someone has actually spent some time and focused on you. Brands can do that as well, and sort of make you feel like a VIP, which I think is really important, because I think everyone should feel like a VIP. My parent, when I was growing up, my parents would always say to me, you know, treat people the way you'd like to be treated. And it's kind of stuck with me since I was a kid. And I think as a brand, you think about it this as kind of like a bigger entity than it really is sometimes. And I think there is this honest, personable nature that gets lost. And I think we have to remember that we have to sort of personify a brand and humanize it a little bit, so we can create those sort of connections with our audiences. And I think that really gets, I think sometimes that gets lost a lot. You have to think about, you know, if I own a brand, would I even shop at my own brand? Would I be happy with the way I'm treated? So there's so many elements to think about, but you can make small changes every day.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we're getting off topic, Ashley. I'm just rambling now.
No. But I also think that what you're saying is kind of encouraging for smaller companies, because when you are doing social yourself, which would be the majority of independent designers or even independent retailers, like when they're first starting, you have that advantage of your Instagram, your Facebook, your email newsletters are super personal and more fun to kind of watch and tag along with, because they're authentically you. Where I find myself like on Instagram, I'll never follow like a big designer brand that I love, like Prada, because it's so boring. It's just a beautiful campaign image, which like is pretty to flip through in a magazine, but it's not something that I really interact with. It doesn't feel personable. Whereas if I leave a comment on a catbird post, or I tagged them in one of my posts and they respond, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so happy right now. Like, you know, my favorite little jewelry store in Brooklyn just, you know, interacted with me. It's just and
now look at you, you're telling
at this point, but it's that different kind of personable element. But
absolutely.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you.
On the note of exclusivity versus inclusivity, which I think is so worth noting, because I feel like inclusivity is just a huge trend right now, culturally and and across branding as well. Are there any other trends you feel like are worth mentioning in branding, whether that's like something visual that you're noticing is trending at the moment, or like a larger kind of attitude, like being inclusive, body positive type of thing?
I mean, those are very sort of value driven trends, you know, like you said, inclusivity and body conscious and all of those attributes. Visually, if I was to look at things visually, I think visually and verbally, I think things have got much more, things are sort of tending to get much more honest. I think, you know, like the people, it's funny, I was thinking of Kim Kardashian's Skims and how it was all about, you know, Skims is for any body shape, no matter who you are. And then there was a video where she actually, her whole body was contoured and in the advert. I'm like, well, this is so, again, this is like, just doing that one thing has probably lost you so much, you know, such an audience. And, you know, that's not a truthful brand. Brands want to, you know, consumers want brands to be honest. I think honesty is one of the best values that a brand can have. I don't know if I'm not really answering your question here, Ashley. You might have to like.
No, but I think you are. People want.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I would say visually, you know, things have got much simpler in terms of like an aesthetic choice. You know, I don't think there's always like Pantone color of the year, which, you know, it's just, I think it's just a marketing ploy. But yeah, I think the idea is not to fit in. You know, what's the point having a unique story that we're going to try and communicate to our audience, and then just following a trend on how everything looks? That's definitely something that we don't do. It's like, take yourself out of a trend and just think, you know, what's the best way we can tell this story for a brand? And yeah, I feel like we try not to be just trendy for the sake of being trendy, but more have relevance, you know, and longevity. You know, trends come and go so quickly. We're not trying to build a brand that's going to come and go quickly. We want it to be around. We want it to be trend proof. You know, you don't want it to go in and out of trends. You want it to be rooted in the story. And if your ads, let's say your ads change to flow with the trends, but your brand's still rooted in its vision and values and aesthetic, I think you can use trends in that respect. But I don't, you know, we would never, we're not trying to build a trendy brand for the sake of being trendy, and nor should anyone.
So maybe
you'll be looking for the next trend and you'll just be flip-flopping around and never really kind of establish anything, I think.
Which in jewelry is not so feasible, of course.
Exactly, yeah.
So maybe it's choosing a color palette that is inspiring you right now, and knowing that you don't have to be married to it, that it can kind of change, like you said, for the marketing part, but kind of more leaning into what makes your brand unique and your designs, your store unique.
Yeah, well, you know, when we think about color, your color palette could be, you know, the concept behind the color palette could be all about nature, and, you know, and that gives you the ability to, gives you the permission to change your color palette as and when you see fit, because it's rooted in this idea of nature, for example. So try and root it in something so it has meaning, rather than
that's a really good tip.
Flip it, you know, just choosing a color because you like it. Because, you know, I know we're going to talk a little bit about rebranding, but when, let's say you rebrand Tiffany's, and it will, you know, or Hermes, we always talk about brand equity, and that essentially means, what have we developed over time that is synonymous with the brand, that is recognizable, that we can't afford to lose? And we need to translate that into the new brand. We need to retain some of that. We're not just, you know, when we do a rebrand, we're not just scrapping everything and saying, oh, great, we're doing a rebrand, let's do something completely new. We're trying to figure out what's working and what can we build upon, and what stuff can we just doesn't work anymore, and we need to evolve, and we need to push it aside and focus on X, Y, and Z. So
before we turn it over to audience questions, because I know that there are a few, I do want to touch on rebranding. If a company is, let's say, just there's been a change in ownership, management, generations, or even just a company has decided that they haven't really embraced their digital social presence as much as they could, and they're ready to, and they're kind of ready to turn over a new leaf. Can you rebrand, and how do you kind of go about refreshing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely, you can rebrand whenever. You can rebrand whenever you want. I think sometimes we get people come to us and say, "Oh, we want to rebrand," and our advice is, or our question to them is, "Why? And where are you going?" Back to those sort of two simple rules. And we might say to them, "I don't think you need a rebrand. I think you need to define your story more," or "I think you need to refresh, we'll keep the logo the same, but we'll, bring in some more purposeful like imagery or language, or we can change the typography system. That's gonna, maybe you want to come in and feel younger. Maybe your audience has changed and you need to refresh because your audience is different." It really depends on. We really have to ask the question why, because I think people tend to want to rebrand just because they want something new and shiny again, and that isn't always the right way into the sort of engagement in the project. Really have to understand, like, is it like you said, is it because of new ownership? Is it because of an audience that you're trying to attract and your current brand doesn't allow you to attract them, or various other reasons? So yes, you can rebrand whenever you want, but I think if we do, we have to work out what equity is worth keeping. What's the new brand going to say about us? Why are we doing it? Everything we have to do it for a reason. I don't think we're just going to do it for the sake of doing it. We would tell you to spend your money on like content or digital, or we'd advise you not to. As much as we love doing it, it's not always, doesn't look good on us either if we don't deliver.
Right. So it's a little more complex.
Yeah.
Than just trading it in for the shiny and new.
Exactly. Yeah, it totally is. And I think today content is king. And I think the brand's first product, believe it or not, is content, because it's not the product, it's the content that you're putting out to get people to see the product. That's how I sort of articulate that, is, content is going to be your most powerful tool. And if you can get that right, then the product's gonna come second, and will be beneficial for the product.
And that's when you can contact an expert like yourself for just some kind of strategy for storytelling.
Exactly, absolutely. I mean, we do pretty much everything. We're not jack of all trades, but we've been doing brand for over 15 years. So that's where our heart lies, I think. And it's so much fun because everyone's got a different problem or trying to solve a different, equation.
Mm-hmm.
And
where can people find you, Simon?
They can find me on Instagram. Our agency is at We Are ABD, and our website is a-b-d.co. Although I will say it's in a refresh, so it's not a true articulation of our brand, unfortunately. I spend all of our time doing other people's, and yours gets
doing it for other
wayside, Yeah, mine definitely needs a refresh. But if anyone wants to reach out and has questions, I'd be more than happy to elaborate on some of the points we talked about today and even further.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. I'll turn it over to Michelle so that we can get to some audience questions.
Thank you, Simon and Ashley. That was a great discussion, and you guys covered so much. It was so interesting. And thanks to our sponsor, RDI Diamonds. As a reminder, you can still type questions into the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. I'm going to give people a minute to enter their questions, and I'm just going to say a quick word about RDI Diamonds. RDI Diamonds, the selection you want, the quality you need. Thousands of diamonds, that's just the beginning. RDI offers a wide range of services and support to help you succeed, from flexible memo options, a partnership with De Beers Group Industry Services, to generous stock options and cost-efficient shipping. RDI's goal is to provide the highest quality both care and diamonds to your store. Visit rdidiamonds.com today to learn more. That is rdidiamonds.com. Now let's get started with our listener questions. So Simon and Ashley, you were so thorough that you actually covered a lot of the questions that came in before the panel. But we do have one that I thought was interesting, and we had another good one that came in while you were talking. So someone wrote in and they want to know, does a brand's heritage/history matter to younger clients?
Absolutely. I think I think millennials love heritage brands because they stand for so much. I think one of the ones I particularly like is Burberry. But I think because they're rooted in so much, but also I think they know who they are, they have a distinct story. And I think there's this appreciation that they're lasting the test of time. So I'm talking from, my one millennial mindset is that, I love heritage brands, but their values may have changed over time because, audiences grow and change, and we're not all still in the 1920s or the 1930s living the same lifestyles. So I think as people evolve and time evolves, their values will slightly shift, I think, to new audiences and what's relevant what's relevant in culture today. And I think if a heritage brand can do that, then that's amazing.
Yeah, very, very, very true. Someone else wants to know, can you please cite any particular jewelry brands, excluding Tiffany, that you think have done an excellent job in their branding?
Okay.
I know Tiffany came up already, and I thought that was an interesting point about Tiffany's color. It's such a strong brand marker for them that they can now play with it. They introduced the Tiffany yellow as a joke, but now they're kind of actually using that in their stores, and it's gotten them a lot of traction.
Yeah, I think I'm not a massive fan of the way it's been visually represented, but I really do like Kataoka jewelry. And I think what's really interesting there is that their consumer is mainly Western. It's like US is their biggest consumer. And you could argue that there was a need, there could be a need to be like, we need to aim this at the American consumer and shift everything, and shift the way they talk and their visual aesthetic, and be like, we're going to aim at the Americans, for instance. But I think what's really good about them is they're not a heritage brand, but they've been around a long time. And I think they've stayed true to their roots of who they are. And it's funny, the Western culture loves Eastern culture and Eastern culture loves Western culture. So I think, a brand like that, if they all of a sudden change to, aim their product and their brand at American or the Western market, it would just fall short and we would no longer love it. We love it because it's Japanese. And I think they've done a really good job of capturing that and staying sort of honest. Another example, I think, I kind of like Irene's brand, Irene Newith. It's like, that you're being invited into a world that's kind of whimsical and playful. and you get that sense when you experience it through her digital, for her e-commerce store. And I think she's done a really good job of really bringing that to life. And the personality of the brand is that whimsical. It's almost like Alice in Wonderland-esque.
Right.
That's the sense that I get from it. So I think those are two brands in the jewelry space that are completely different and are doing, completely different things as well. But I think they're both successful.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So last question here. Someone says, I work with clients in both the pro sports and luxury jewelry industries in addition to film. Where do you see the parallels or lessons learned from your sports clients like Chelsea FC transferring to the jewelry industry? Just curious.
Yeah. Well, for us, our client base has been so broad. And, in brand, I think that lends itself well to mixing up industry, because you come from a background that can have a different perspective, look at different, you kind of have to have some sort of humility and understand different audiences. And I think, if we worked in just luxury, we would be coming from a perspective of just luxury. So I think being able to come from an industry or an agency that has all of these various industry experiences, it lends its well to be able to have what I would like to say, a bit more of a unique perspective. I think at the end of the day, it's what we try so hard to do is have these deep, meaningful kickoff conversations with our clients to understand who they are and their challenges. And then, we look for references in all different aspects of industries to start to bring that to life. And I think there's really interesting things, that might be happening in the tech space that haven't been considered in the jewelry space, or things that happen in sport. And we've done a lot of we've done a lot of exhibition spaces and for Wimbledon Museum. And I think when you come to jewelry, we're doing a museum in sport, but I think that translates to how are we going to show this product in its best light, or how are we going to create a display around this product and actually tell the story? Because I think it all roots back to storytelling, and I think just having that sort of breadth of industry knowledge has become really helpful.
Yeah, I think one mistake people in jewelry make sometimes is they don't take enough lessons from other industries. They think that we just have this really unique product and know what works to sell this or that, or speak to this consumer or that type of fan isn't going to work for jewelry. But really, there are lessons to be learned from all industries. And but you're right, it's all about storytelling. And everybody is looking to attract a crowd, attract a customer, attract someone, and represent their brand in a certain way.
I agree, and I think that's a great point, because I think, thinking about it, the person that's sitting down going to watch a tennis match can also be leaving the tennis match and go shopping at Harrods or Barney's or wherever. These people are everywhere, and all of these, they transcend all of these shopping experiences anyway. So I think it's a really useful tool to be able to pull from those. And I would encourage people. We say we always look outside of the industry to see what other brands are doing, because I think it's almost like fusion, isn't it? You take something from tech and think, oh, how can I infuse this into luxury? And all of a sudden you've done something different.
So that's a great point.
Yeah, I think it's a way of opening new doors potentially.
Yeah, that's a great point. And perhaps that tennis fan is going to go shopping for a tennis bracelet.
Maybe.
Thanks again, Simon, for joining us today. This was excellent. And thanks so much, Editor Ashley, for hosting. It was a fantastic discussion. My next question is going to return next Tuesday. That's going to be June 22nd, same time, 2 p.m. Eastern. Associate Editor Lenore Fido is going to be interviewing Gail Brett Levine and Mark T. Cartwright about the complexities of the jewelry appraisal process. You can find that information up on the screen right now. Thanks to everyone for joining us today, and please take care.